Welcome in. Basketball by association is our name. Hoopage is our game. What is up? Joel Cordes, my co-host.
Hey, the BbA Byte is ready to go, and it may be the hottest thing that happens all week for everybody.
Wow, it's ready to go. We're 20 seconds in. I like that. So we can go ahead and publish because we're done. We're done. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
Drink it all in, everybody.
Yes. Yeah, we got what I would like to call a pretty good show coming up. And you're right. It's very, very, very chilly. Basically, Texas East.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are expecting, actually, as we record, even more sleet, snow, and ice where I am at. So eventually, you will no longer see the Knicks logo, and you will just see my face as I get back to the studio.
In Michigan, we call that Wednesday, but you know how it is.
Yeah, well, we can't deal with it quite the same. And the bad thing is, and I won't harp on this too much, the ice is sort of the big deal here. The ice stuff is what's really sort of freaked everybody out because, hard to drive on that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the stuff that even in the Midwest where people are seasoned for that, you get an ice storm and it can shut stuff down. And, prayers up for everybody in Texas dealing with the power grid issue. Like it really isn't a joking matter, even for Northerners, because we know like when the ice gets involved, it is dangerous to drive and it can topple trees and power lines and it just makes a big mess. So we'll hope that warmer weather is coming up soon.
Yes, indeed. Joel, before we start with the program, where can people find the video feed of this podcast?
Go to the old YouTube and look up Basketball by Association. You can also look up the hashtag BbA, and you'll find the latest episodes of the show if you want to see our faces. If you're reviled and repulsed by that very thought, you can keep listening to the audio versions on Spreaker and Spotify, iTunes, all that good stuff. But we are a multimedia conglomerate empire now at this point, and you can find us basically everywhere. I think we're streaming on the moon now.
Is there another type of conglomerate out there besides multimedia?
Oh, I would assume, you can get into your steel and...
is there a steel conglomerate out there?
there used to be. I'm sure there still is one. Railroads and the such, but modern conglomerates is probably multimedia.
All right.
Yeah.
I like to start this podcast, if I can, by talking about a gambling loss I had, which was last night. I had the Phoenix Suns minus 7.5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the Nets were not playing with Kyrie, and they were not playing with Kevin Durant, and it was just James Harden and everybody else.
James Harden and friends.
And I'll tell you, in the first half, it looked really, really good, and I sort of went away from that game until I woke up in the middle of the night and saw that the Nets had come back to win that game, 128-124. And then I went into the deep dive into the highlights and some of the video that's sort of been clipped on the social media. And Joe, we don't often sort of in the moment take a chance to sort of indulge in the greatness of a performance that happens. But what James Harden did last night to lead that Nets team back and essentially one and a half hands tied behind his back was remarkable basketball.
And the Nets are currently one game out of first place behind Philadelphia as the Celtics, the Bucks, the Pacers have all hit kind of middling skids. And the Nets are finding a little momentum even as Durant and Irving continue to be in and out of the lineup. But yeah, it's just a reminder that in the modern NBA, there's probably about 20 players who can truly take over a game. But there's fewer and win a game almost single-handedly. But there's fewer than 10 that consistently can do that, where you can bank on that being a strong possibility. And you yourself are going to have a very excellent defensive game and probably very strong on the offensive game to be able to withstand something like that. James Harden is one of those 10 players who more often than not, despite the warts that we all know on the defensive end, more often than not, you can bet on him being able to carry a team. And the Nets still, despite the fact that they've been thinned out by all these trades to get Harden and to bring in Durant and Irving and so forth, there still is a competent supporting cast there. So yeah, they played very well. Phoenix is one of those teams that it's a little cliche at this point, but they're on the younger side still.
They were leading by 24 at one point.
Yeah, but it's the NBA, right? It's the NBA, and no lead is ever safe. And younger teams maybe anecdotally seem to have more of that propensity to, when another team starts to make that run against them, not always be able to weather that storm.
No, here's what the Nets. First of all, Phoenix did not play poorly overall as a team. Chris Paul went for 29. Devin Booker went for 22. In fact, I was paying attention a lot to the beginning of this game, and I think in the first 27 or 28 minutes, maybe slightly more, that only one player had played nearly as many minutes as James Harden. I think it was at 19 at the time. It was Devin Booker, who was at 17. So eventually those numbers did adjust, but Booker goes for 22. Ayton goes for 16 and 9. Jay Crowder and Bridges went for double digits as well. But the Nets, their starting five was Joe Harris, who did go for 22, but Bruce Brown Jr., DeAndre Jordan, James Harden, and Tyler Johnson, and they came back from 24 down to beat a not bad Phoenix team. That team's 7 games over 500.
Right, and they're clearly a playoff team.
Yeah, Phoenix is a good team to do that too. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that performance by James Harden, who went for 38, 7, and 11, was just great. It was just a great individual mid-season performance. And I just wanted to give it a little shout out and love at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, and his ability to manipulate a defense through his own offense then creates shots for other people. You mentioned Joe Harris, but off the bench, Jeff Green had 18 points. He was 7 of 14 from the field. Landry Shamet was 13 points. He was 3 of 6 from downtown. And on the night, the Nets shoot 50% from 3. They were 20 of 40 from downtown. So clearly they were able to get something cooking. They had a slow first quarter, which was where you saw things happening. And Phoenix scores 42 points in the second quarter, but Brooklyn turns around and puts up 40 points on their own. And Harden has had some interesting quotes lately in a good way, especially after, the rough year he had early on, talking about that, our offense is as good as advertised and we're going to keep getting better. We know we have to get better on the defensive end. Sometimes that stuff can be lip service, but it's good to hear the Nets acknowledging we got work to do in both areas. They're going to be one of those active teams like we talked about on our previous show on Friday. They're going to be one of those teams that's active at the trade deadline, looking for buyouts, looking for veterans who, may come up on the cheap because other teams are cutting bait at this point.
Also as good as advertised is manscaped.com, the Lawnmower 3.0 with trademark technology to keep your boys intact when it comes time to trim it downstairs is elite and unique to them. You can get right now for a temporary time 20% off and free shipping by using our promo code at manscaped.com. It's super simple, super easy. Go to the website right now. You can pause this and come back to it. Manscaped.com. Promo code BRAWL. BRAWL. Get you 20% off whatever you want, including the Lawnmower 3.0, which is spectacular. And free shipping, all by using our promo code BRAWL. BRAWL. You will thank us. I promise you that. Joel, the trade deadline is still a little while away, but some teams are doing some maneuvering to get ready for some potential trades and to start looking for suitors. The Cavaliers are doing that with Andre Drummond, but also doing that is Detroit, and they're doing that with Blake Griffin, who is really fallen off a map the last couple of seasons. I think he's averaging 12 and 5 right now. Mm-hmm. But interestingly enough, the Pistons are doing the same thing that the Cavs are doing right now. They're sitting that particular player until they can find out whether they're doing some sort of buyout or a trade opportunity that's presented itself over the next few weeks. Draymond Green's got some comments on that, and we'll address those in just a moment. But first, Blake Griffin, what he has left in the tank, and is this a buyout or trade situation, do you think? Is there somewhere that would take a Blake Griffin on and give something back for him?
I think yes. He's only got one more year left on his deal after this. You're right that he's fallen off a cliff. I think he played 15 games last year. His first season in Detroit, he was still over 20 points per game and looked very good, but got hurt right at the end, right before the playoffs. He and Andre Drummond had something nice, and Drummond, of course, was on the Pistons prior to this before getting traded to the Cavaliers. They had something good going, and you could see where the idea came from with that pairing. But Blake Griffin makes zero sense in Detroit now, as they yet again have slid from mediocrity back into whatever this rebuild is going to look like. And not only is it because he's an older player, he's 31 and on a big contract, so he'd be stealing minutes from the young guys they're trying to develop, but because his production just isn't there, he doesn't make sense on that type of team. Now, does he make sense? His passing is still as good as it was. So much revolves around his health. Can he actually be out there consistently from game to game? That's been up and down this season again, too. And that's long been, a complaint with Blake Griffin. I mean, it seems like we're dating back 6-7+ years that health has been that concern. He was also injured at the very beginning of his career, too, right? He missed that early, I think his first season, he had to redshirt essentially. So, that concern is never going to go away. Could he play, dating back to like the 80s Celtics, that Bill Walton type of role where he comes off of the bench and his passing is phenomenal? He can make some buckets. He's going to be a veteran energy guy. Absolutely. Is that a $30+ million expense that most teams are going to have? Not often, because if they can land a player in that $30 million range, it's probably going to be somebody else. So I think, but there are enough teams out there that have dead weight, that have contracts that they could package together, and maybe they look at a Blake Griffin as some sort of a shot in the arm. It betrays Detroit's urgency to trade him that they would sit him, knowing that they don't want him to get hurt again. Typically at the trade deadline, the opposite happens. Teams showcase their guys. Suddenly somebody who was, benched for a while is starting for 5 games. But in the case of like Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond, those teams want them gone. So yeah, they're going to preserve those guys, but
yeah, the last thing you want to do is for any kind of tweak to an ankle.
Right.
As we talked about with Blake Griffin, who's had knee issues, ankle issues, hamstring issues for like ever. The last thing you want is anything to basically say it's not worth it for us.
But that also betrays the fact that, hey, if I'm thinking about this guy for $30 million, maybe I would do it if I can get him for really cheap and I can unload one of my own crappy contracts. But if I can't, I'm just going to wait till the buyout market and force Detroit's hand and see if I can get him for a little cheaper. Of course, you've got a lot more competition to deal with at that point too.
Yeah, it's a gamble. It's a little bit of a gamble right now to sort of see if you can get over March 25th, about a month or so, to sort of see if someone's willing to swoop in and just sort of go ahead and take Blake Griffin. Where it makes sense to you for a guy with, at this stage of his career, with those kind of issues, physically that is, what makes sense for his position, what he can offer for him to be a possible landing spot, whether it's buyout or trade?
I think just about any contender that can cobble together the money to do it, and typically in the NBA,
you think this market's kind of deep for him?
I think it's deep enough that a lot of teams will have that conversation and see whether they can get him for 20 cents on the dollar, in which case just about everybody except for maybe the Lakers makes a lot of sense. Utah probably doesn't make much sense, but some of those teams we talked about on last week's show that are struggling right now, and maybe could look at him as a shot in the arm and have got some contracts they'd like to move. Maybe Toronto and Denver get in that mix. Dallas could get in that mix. I think Portland could be an interesting place because they're down Yusuf Nurkic. They're having to play really small up front right now with essentially Robert Covington and Carmelo Anthony in the mix. Possibly even the Clippers, although I think that would be a 3rd-team deal. Would they consider bringing him back? And now, again, it would be a totally different role, but the Clippers are a team that likes to use that depth. Up front right now, though, you've got Marcus Morris in a reserve role. They're starting Nick Batum, and then it gets a little bit iffy. You've got Patrick Patterson there, who I think is totally washed up at this point, and then some young guys like Daniel Aturu, who maybe aren't ready for those minutes. So a lot of it really comes down to, are contenders able to offer 20 cents on the dollar and not have Detroit hang up? If Detroit is hanging up on that sort of thing, then most of the mid-level teams that are like fringe playoff teams, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for them to break the bank on a whole nother year of him as well, especially because he is one of those guys that's a perennial risk to miss an entire season. Then I think you will see him hit the buyout market, and then it might be fringe playoff teams that can offer him a decent amount of minutes and a nice role, somebody like Charlotte or whatever, that hey, come in here, we're building towards something good and we could use your help because you're not costing us actually $30 million.
I want to get to what Draymond Green said in just a moment, but I want to add another guy onto that list. We alluded to him a couple of times, Andre Drummond, for Cleveland, who has I think he's 27. He's played under 30 minutes a game this year, but he's averaging a double-double, a strong double-double too, in the games that he's playing. I think he's like 18 and 14 to that degree. He still gets you a couple blocks a game. He's still a rebound machine and still got a lot of mileage left on him. Andre Drummond, I think a couple of seasons ago, was sort of seen as just a dude that can get you rebounds, and that's basically it. Is that still where you think the mindset for an Andre Drummond would be? And if so, are we on a limited market for what we may see for AD?
You are on a more limited market than Blake Griffin, which is odd to say because Drummond is by far the better player overall, talent-wise at this point, and the more reliable player. But Blake Griffin still, despite being, drawn back because of injuries, is still the more modern NBA friendly. So Now you're looking at teams that are struggling inside or that have an opening there. So when you talk about Andre Drummond, now you're looking at Brooklyn, although they don't have the money at this point because they're so locked down in those bigger contracts to make that work. That's a buyout situation if he's going there. But you might look at Dallas, and Kristaps Porzingis has played the 5, but Andre Drummond is a guy that you could play with Porzingis in certain lineups. Dallas has gotten killed defensively off and on. Having a nice tough guy inside among that group would be, I think, a godsend for them. Somebody like Houston, if they're just trying to collect different names at this point and assets to move, they could get involved because, like we've talked about with them, they've got people to move and they've got pieces that they could acquire Drummond with and look at that as some sort of an upgrade to then move Drummond down the line or not re-sign him or whatever they're looking at. But there's not a lot of other teams that are in that playoff mix who really need help at the center spot. Again, Portland's name comes up. Do they have the cap ability to make that happen? I'm not sure. Toronto is the other one where Drummond would be an upgrade over Aaron Baines. Is he a long-term upgrade over Chris Boucher, who they've been developing and they like and is a nice shot blocker too? I'm not sure about that. But, I mean, they want to hunt for that playoff spot. Do they have the money to make it work? I'm not sure they do without moving Pascal Siakam in some way, and maybe that's not such a great idea if it's just Drummond involved. And the other thing is Toronto does like to play that stretchy, mobile type of game, and even Aaron Baines can shoot a 3 a little bit. Drummond really can't. So you're right, the market is a lot more selective for Drummond, despite the fact he's the better player.
Yeah, it's so interesting to sort of see like Andre Drummond basically at the very end of what was perfect era for him basketball wise, and like at the very, very tail end as far as what makes him so good. And to see how like a Blake Griffin, even though he is hobbled right now, sort of fits in more schemes and makes more sense for what you're going to try to get from him, even for short term, that just it's going to fit probably more smoothly with a lot more teams.
I would say if the Warriors had not drafted James Wiseman, Drummond, that would have been probably the number one option for them in their state. And Wiseman, of course, is hurt. Kevon Looney is hurt. Marquise Chris. They're really thin up front right now. But that's a team that's so stretchy at every other position that having a guy who's just a rebound gobbler like that would make a ton of sense, especially because Drummond is a really nice defender. If a buyout happens, then you're going to see him probably gravitate towards one of the super teams, whether it's Brooklyn, whether it's the Lakers, depending on how set the Clippers are on Serge Ibaka and Ivica Zubac, which I think they're pretty set based on the way they've played. But I wouldn't be surprised then if it's Nets or Lakers, and Drummond will have made his money because a buyout is not going to be cheap for him. He'll have made his money, and you're going to see him team up with a team that it'll just be an embarrassment of riches if they're going to get Andre Drummond.
Yeah, and Andre Drummond, I think it's like averaging the most amount of points he's averaged in a season so far this year. And still it just doesn't quite fit everybody's mold of tea right now. And it's just sort of weird to kind of watch that, because there's so many miles left on that dude, and there's so much that he can accomplish. It's just, for who?
You're right, and there's also, it's the fact that there's a ton of other teams out there that really do have good young centers. We keep talking about, oh, is it the death of the center? No, it's not, because somebody like Phoenix says, we've got DeAndre Ayton. The Wolves have Karl Anthony Towns. Philadelphia has Joel Embiid. The Nuggets have Nikola Jokic. The Miami Heat have, Bam Adebayo. Maybe somebody like Orlando gets in on it and says, well, let's move on from the Nick Vucevic era, which it is time to do that. But does adding Andre Drummond make them any more of a playoff team? Probably not, without some sort of a real deck shuffling and getting the rest of their players healthy, which isn't going to happen this year. So that'd be more of a long-term thing. But most teams, I mean, Charlotte, maybe they looked at that line and say, we are in the hunt. Drummond was rumored to be going to Charlotte last year, and then it didn't happen. And Tyler Zeller is a really nice screen setter, but that's about all Tyler Zeller is really nice at. So it would definitely be an upgrade, but they've already been giving a lot of center minutes to PJ Washington, who's done a nice job and is way younger and way cheaper. So yeah, it is the modern NBA. Maybe Boston, with that shot in the arm, that is needed there, looks at this and goes, okay, we're going to move on from Tice, Tristan Thompson, and or Robert Williams, probably two of those three. And we're going to bring in Andre Drummond and give ourselves like a big four, really a big three, because Kemba Walker is just struggling. But we're going to, really try to up the ante here and push for the playoffs, because at some point you would think Danny Ainge's job has to be on the line if they disappoint.
Yeah, you can only hoard so many picks, right? Like you can only take so many picks from other teams before you're like, all right, we're gonna need to see you in the championship, in the finals at some point, and winning one or two of these every now and then. Draymond Green was asked about sort of Andre Drummond, and more specifically, he gets to the situation of what we alluded to at the beginning of this pod, which is these dudes being sat down as opposed to sort of being played, and how the perception of those players varies wildly from fans. And I want to play for you. It's about 2 minutes, but I think it's really, really good. Draymond's always really, really smart with things like this. He is a super good ambassador for the league and super smart. But I want you to play this for just a couple minutes and get your thoughts on it, Joel.
Of players in this league to watch Andre Drummond before the game sit on the sideline, then go to the back, and then come out in street clothes because a team is going to trade him is bull. Because when James Harden asked for a trade and essentially dogged it, I don't think there was no surprise or there's no one's going to fight back that James was dogging it his last days in Houston. But he was castrated for wanting to go to a different team, and everybody destroyed that man. And yet a team can come out and say, oh, we want to trade a guy, and then that guy is to go sit. And if he doesn't stay professional, then he's a cancer, and he's not good in someone's locker room, and he's the issue. And we've seen situations of Harrison Barnes getting pulled off the bench. DeMarcus Cousins finding out that he's traded in an interview after the All-Star game, and we continue to let this happen. But I got fined for stating my opinion of what I thought should happen with another player. But teams can come out and continue to say, oh, we're trading guys, we're not playing you. And yet we're to stay professional. At some point, as players, we need to be treated with the same respect and have the same rights that the team can have. Because as a player, you're the worst person in the world when you want a different situation. But a team can say they're trading you, and that man is to stay in shape. He is to stay professional. And if not, his career is on the line. At some point, this league has to protect the players from embarrassment like that. We talk all of this stuff about you can't do this, you can't say that publicly. If you say that publicly, you're fine. Anthony Davis got fined, I think, $100,000 or something like that for demanding a trade publicly.
Joel, I guess I just open it up to you. Thoughts?
Draymond Green is so smart at the game, both on the court and off, that I think there's a good chance he will be a general manager in the NBA someday. And I'm very interested to see how his perspective on this matter will change when he's in that chair, in that management chair someday versus now. Because on the surface level, everything that Draymond Green is saying makes sense. It absolutely is a double standard, and the league has long protected that double standard. But on the other side, the other hand, it's about controlling the message. The player is not the organization. They're not the company. It's the same reason that companies don't allow an employee to go out and hold a press conference on their own about the state of the company and what they want. And if they do, there probably may be a firing involved in that, or at least some sort of, issue. Yeah, people jump on their social media all the time and vent that sort of thing, but that's not in an official capacity for the company. As that player, you are an official part of that company, but you are not the management portion of it. So companies do this all the time. The organization does it. They control the message. If you've got 15 different players on your active roster, and all 15 are allowed to demand and do trades and comment on other players and all that sort of thing, you will have 15 different messages. It will get messy really, really fast. And could some guys handle that and do it responsibly? Absolutely. Would it be less of a double standard if they were allowed that without the propensity of fines? Absolutely. Is that realistic that that's going to happen? I don't think you see that afforded employees of a team anywhere else in the business world whatsoever.
Right.
And I think if Draymond Green is sitting in the general manager's chair as the one who's trying to make those deals and trying to keep the ship afloat, he has a very different perspective on that.
Yeah.
But again, you can see where he's coming from, and you can understand why, as a player, you would be frustrated by that, because it does feel unfair. But it just seems like one of those aspects of, I'm sorry, friend, this is the job.
Yeah, like, I hate to be sort of a company guy with this, but like, if you're Draymond Green, your company is Draymond Green, right? Like that's who you're representing. That's who you're working for. That is who you are putting every modicum of thought in the best interest of. If you're the GM of the Golden State Warriors, it's different. It's a whole different organization, and an entire organization that you are responsible for trying to portray the best interest of, which may be, hey, let's not have a player go out here and demand a trade in public. And listen, if you want to take away the fines for that, because we all know and we all find out from the reporting from Shams Charania or Gene Wojciechowski, like we know if someone's going to privately, quietly request a trade and they want out, right? So if you want to take away the fines for that, if Anthony Davis just does, you just want to fine him for going on Instagram or whatever he wants to do and request a trade, I'm sort of all right with that. But like, I also understand wanting to de-incentivize dudes just randomly after a loss, maybe losing 7 or 8 in a row, and just saying, you know what, I want out of here. Because first of all, how do we know that you've given the team the opportunity to either answer your questions, try to make you feel better, or B, they're trying to also, if they're going to acquiesce to you, letting everybody know immediately you want gone does take away their chance to sort of get what they perceive as close to value for you. Like it's I don't think it's nearly as murky. I think the interesting thing he comes out with is that talking about the perception of James Harden or any other player that requests a trade. And Joel, I don't know what you do about that. That's just how people are going to think, right? Like, people are just going to think that if you want out, especially if you're a fan of that team, that, hey, yeah, well, screw that guy, right? Like, if he wants to leave my team, whatever, screw him. I don't like him.
Yeah, you bring up excellent points, because there really are the two different dynamics. There's the organizational dynamic, and I don't think that one is going to change, because, hey, if I work at Google and I want to go to get a different job, and so I start dogging it at work, there's a high chance I might get fired. If I hold a press conference, and call the media into my office at Google to tell them I'm looking for a different job, I'm probably getting fired awfully quick from that. Like, it just... He's asking for something to change in the workplace that, yeah, like, as an employee, you're all we're all replaceable, right? And unfortunately, that's the reality of a capitalistic society. I'm sorry. On the other hand, it is a little bit different in the NBA because without the players, without the talent, you don't have an NBA. Whereas with Google, without the employees, you probably hire other employees. There is a little bit of a difference there, and I understand that point. But you're right, the perception and the media framing of it, and even just public perception, I think that is an area that people can do better with and be more understanding to say it is a business. And just like, hey, you decided you wanted to leave Google because you wanted to go work for some other company, that doesn't make you a terrible person. That doesn't mean that you hate Google to your core. It just means that you wanted to go do something different. So why is it that this employee, this star of the team, they're not wrong for wanting to go somewhere else? Now, again, you're right. If they start dogging it, and you're going, all right, well, you're getting paid a lot of money to dog it, I can call you unprofessional for doing that. Just like I could call that person at Google who just really was mailing it in for the last month. I could call that unprofessional too. But it's not evil necessarily. It's just unprofessional. So you're absolutely right. And to bring this full circle, I'll just end on this story. In a past life, a long time ago, I was a high school history teacher. I had I was a principal for a year or two as well in an emergency situation for a school. I had an entirely different perspective on rules and relationships and organization, a totally different perspective then than I did as a teenager when I was going through high school, right? And you think everything's unfair and everybody's an idiot and why would they do this? And you're right, even as a teenager, you see there's plenty of double standards and there's plenty of hypocrisy and tons of stuff that probably should change. But you get in that other chair and there's an awful lot of stuff too where you go, oh, now I know why it had to be like that, even if it still kind of sucks all the same. Like that's Draymond, someday when you're in a front office, and I'm fully confident that you will be because you're such a bright dude and you see this, it'll be on you in that front office to be one of those professional, like really good guys as a GM. And they're out there, and there's organizations out there that treat their players with respect and don't put them in a situation like DeMarcus Cousins, where he found out about a trade via reporter. I'm sorry, DeMarcus Cousins was also playing for a trash organization at the time who was very unprofessional, right? Just like there's companies that are professional and others that just take advantage of people. Draymond, it'll be on you to be better than that. And it's okay for you to call for organizations to be better than that. But you're also going to see that there's sometimes these difficult situations that are unavoidable too, because it's just the nature of the beast.
Let me end on one sort of like less than a minute type story. Finally, the All-Star game format has come out for March the 7th. And it turns out that basically the NBA has rented a gym for half a day because they're going to have the three-point competition in the pregame, play the first half, do the slam dunk contest at halftime, play the second half, and I think sprint out of the arena as soon as everything is done to try to get some modicum of safety and all-star festivities in one sort of, I guess, just to get it to happen. Your thoughts on just sort of seeing it all jammed in together at the same time? Oh, by the way, your all-star game, your slam dunk contest features no all-stars.
I love it in that, yes, they need to get it done and over with. We talked before, like a week or two ago, about the short timeline that they're having to deal with. This is one way to help mitigate that and get the players back home, get everybody quarantined that needs to do that, but also give people the rest that they deserve, especially after this was thrown together kind of as a curveball, according to a lot of the players. I also personally have never been a fan of like this entire weekend of just stretching it out, and we need the skills competition and the celebrity game, and we need to have a special halftime musical performance for everyone, and it's gotten so
It's rookies
overblown.
versus sophomores, and
Yeah, it's just so bloated and overwrought, and yeah, it's fun to a point, but it's not that fun. So to compact everything together and be like, nope, for one night you're going to get to see all of it, I am 100% okay with that, and I hope they learn a couple lessons about condensing a schedule, because even with something as awesome as All-Star Weekend, less truly can be more if you do it right.
I don't disagree with you, honestly. Like maybe not over one night, but maybe like over a 2-night thing where like you do all the fun skill stuff on one night, or maybe do the Celebrity All-Star Game before the actual All-Star Game, as opposed to doing it like in a ballroom on Friday night before everything. Like, there's times just to shove it all in. I know everybody wants to sort of have an entire day for every single event, but not necessary. Not necessary. All right, Joel, that's going to do it for us. Another good BbA bye for the peeps. Would you like to say some goodbyes to the people?
Goodbye, everybody. Stay warm, stay safe, and we will see you at the end of the week for a full edition of BbA. Again, check us out on YouTube. Search Basketball by Association. We're also on Spreaker and Spotify and iTunes if you want the audio version.
Yep. Everywhere you get podcasts, we are there. Stitcher, Amazon, Google, Deezer, Castbox, Giovanni. I don't know. Lots of words I don't know, but we're there.